Just like the last presenter, my presentation is in two halves. The numbers, so we'll get through that quite quickly, and then the story behind the numbers. But first of all, let me say how it's my pleasure to be here to introduce you to the findings of PricewaterhouseCoopers Global Entertainment and Media Outlook. Let me just explain what this is. We've been doing this now for exactly 10 years. And what it does is it looks 5 years forward to forecast what is happening in the world of entertainment and media. It covers 12 segments, going anywhere from sort of traditional print through to online, through to video games, etc. It also covers data with respect to 48 countries. It's a 600-page document, and if I was trying to summarize 600 pages in 45 minutes, I'd be a hero, so I'm not even going to try. I'm just going to give you a few headlines. That's what it looks like. That's the executive summary. But let's go in and talk about the content. And really, the story of any forecast right now has to start with the economy, but I'm not going to dwell on it too much. First of all, just recapping on what we cover in the Outlook, and hopefully you can see all that, 12 segments. What's the major story? Well, following on from the last speaker, the fact that there is no place to hide now from the digital transformation. Actually, let's face it, migration to digital is not a new story. The last speaker said we started talking about it in 2004. I can't quite remember when we started talking about it, but I now know that several things have been happening over the last few years, which perhaps in some ways looked as if it wasn't happening or it was happening slower. And you know what that was? That was 3 or 4 years of very booming ad markets. Basically, brands had more money than they knew what to do with, and they threw it in all types of advertising, not just digital. So if you were a media company and you kept saying, you know, these people keep talking about the migration to digital, but how come the adverts the adverts are still going on primetime television? Well, I believe now that ad bubble has gone away, it is quite clear that this year's theme of our Outlook, No Place to Hide, is entirely appropriate. Okay, here are the headline numbers. We split the 48 countries into 4 parts of the world, and basically what we talk about are compound annual growth rates. Now, normally when we do this, it's quite simple, because growth is normally in a direction, one line, and I can average it out and talk about compound annual growth rates. The problem is, we've got a downturn and then we've got an upturn. So what I'm actually going to do is to split the 5 years into exactly that. And I'm going to talk a little bit about the downturn and what performs well in the downturn, or doesn't, and then look to the upturn. So just some quick numbers, and these are compound annual growth rates. And here is 2009, 2010. If you were to look at 2009, the number would obviously be a lot larger, and then the decline slows down in 2010. And what you can see here is if you draw an imaginary line across the world, maybe that was the equator, you'd effectively see that the 2 regions on the bottom still have some growth associated with it, and the others do not. If we then move on to the period of growth, same sort of story. Latin America and Asia still performing better than the Americas and Europe. And in fact, if we were to then combine all of that and look over a 5-year period, you will see that Asia and Latin America consistently outperform the rest of the world. And in fact, if you took Japan out of the Asia-Pacific numbers, the actual growth rate for Asia would be 7%. So let's look at how those 12 segments perform over the 5-year period. Well, actually, let's see how they perform in the downturn, first of all. And what you can see from this is that anything that has a high advertising element in it, any other component that has a high element of advertising, does particularly badly. What I should have said at the very beginning, though, is that what we're trying to do here is trying to estimate the revenues from the 2 revenue streams that our industry enjoys. First one of which is advertising, and the second one of which is consumer spending. And generally what we will see is those segments that have high element of advertising underperform those that do not. Consumer spending actually is maintaining itself okay-ish during the downturn. So as a consequence, you can see segments like video games certainly outperforming the rest. And then you can also see the top line, which is internet access, also growing significantly. We include internet access in our numbers because if you think about it, what are you doing when you pay your broadband subscription? You are paying for access to content. After all, that's what the web was about. In terms of the upturn, then we actually see a slightly different picture, and we can see that most segments return to growth, with the exception of music. And I don't really want to talk about music in this audience, but I can do later if people would like me to. But what you can see here is that most segments returning to growth, but clearly online advertising returning and powering its way ahead. And when I show some slides just on advertising later, you'll see that very clearly. In fact, not only is there no place to hide, but during a slowdown in the economy, we believe that the migration that we're talking about will go faster. Why is that? Because the average consumer is looking for a better deal with respect to their content acquisition. In fact, if anything, they want it free. So what does that do? That encourages the migration online.